Altitude sickness, a very real, very dangerous thing that we need to talk about today. Hi, I'm Jeff. Welcome to my channel, 14ers for Beginners, where an ordinary guy like me wants to help ordinary folks such as yourselves climb your first few 14ers. Hope this information is helpful. If it is, please hit like, hit subscribe. If you have questions, drop those in the comments. I would love to help out however I can. Well, AMS, known as acute mountain sickness or altitude sickness, is a very real thing, a very serious thing that we need to talk about. And let's face it, altitude is part of what draws us to these mountains, right? They're tall, they're high, and we know that increases the challenge. We know it also increases the beauty of the view and such at the top. But we gotta be real with ourselves about altitude sickness. I don't live in Colorado, but I've been in and out of Colorado hundreds of times in my life, and I was just shocked that I went to Colorado for years and years and years and years and years and never once had any altitude issues. And then one day, up on a 14er, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was stunned. I didn't know, like, I was disoriented because it was just so surprising to me how hard and how fast it hit me. It's hit me a few times since. It's something I do worry about, something I think about now that I've had it, when honestly before I never thought about it because it was never an issue. And so I can just tell you from personal experience, if you deal with the altitude sickness, it is a big deal, and you're going to want to be educated and prepared as you go. Another thing we just need to say up front, we just need to acknowledge this at the beginning of this, is I'm not a doctor. I've just done research. I've done my own kind of educating myself so that I can do this well. I can participate in this activity. And so I would encourage you, if this is a concern for you, to talk to a medical person, someone who actually has training and education in this, and they will be helpful. There's another element that we have to kind of confront with this that isn't what we want it to be, and that is, of all the different elements it takes to hike a 14er, we can control a lot of things. We can know what clothing or packs or food and those sort of things, and we can make decisions and control those elements. Honestly, altitude sickness is one thing you can't control. You cannot plan for it in terms of knowing whether or not it is going to happen. All you can do is do your best and find out. And that's really discouraging to hear, I'm sure. And trust me, when it first hit me and it ruined my hike that first time, I wasn't happy about it either, but it is just the reality of what it is. There is nobody who can say this won't impact them, because we just don't know. When we think about who is at risk for altitude sickness, the fact of the matter is everybody is at risk. It is very unpredictable. The only people who probably have the lowest amount of risk is if you live at a high altitude. If you're living in Leadville, odds are you can climb a 14er and never have any issues, right? Because you live at a high altitude. But the lower of an elevation you live at, the higher the chance this is going to happen. And the bigger the difference from where you live to where you're going, the higher the odds this is going to happen. And so we just need to know that. Some other issues or factors that go into who may be more at risk and who may not is if you have any lung or heart conditions. This is all about how things circulate in our body, and those are what are causing the circulation. So if you have those issues, your odds of having altitude sickness go up. If you're pregnant, it goes up because your body's working for two bodies, for two people, and so that's going to make it harder to do. It's going to increase your odds. If you've previously had AMS, it may cause it more often. It may not, but research shows that can cause it to happen more easily. Generally speaking, fitness helps. Having a higher level of fitness helps, but it is certainly no guarantee. I've known some very fit people that get altitude sickness, and so we want to be fit. That's one of the reasons why I want to encourage you in that video to be fit, but it still doesn't guarantee anything. And the fact of the matter is we don't know. So what actually causes AMS? AMS is a combination of a lack of oxygen and a change in the air pressure. That as we go up in elevation, the oxygen levels change in terms of what we breathe in. We breathe in a volume of content the percentage of that is oxygen drops the higher you get. And compared to sea level, compared to 14,000 feet, you're at about 40% less oxygen in what you take in. And so if you live at sea level or close to it, that's a big difference, right? And of course, if, the higher up you live, you're used to breathing that lower percentage, and so the gap is a little less, but it's all about the amount of oxygen you're taking in, that difference. And then the pressure, barometric pressure that's on your body and the changes that makes. And we don't even think about it usually, but when we get up there, that is what's causing this to happen. So what are some ways we can prevent it? Well, what mountain climbers call acclimatization, whichever pronunciation, you can take measures in those ways, but odds are you have a limited amount of time in terms of your travel schedule to kind of work with, and so you're going to be kind of limited on what you can do with that process. One of the things though is time. The slower you go up, the more time you spend on that ascent, the less likelihood. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to hike slow or hike fast. That isn't what we're talking about. We're talking days worth of time or weeks. That if you live at sea level, if you think you're going to fly to Denver and drive up the mountain and hike tomorrow morning, that is increasing your odds of AMS. Whereas if you said, hey, I'm going on a 10-day vacation in Colorado, and we're going to fly to Denver, spend a couple days, we're going to go up to 7,000 or 8,000 feet, spend a couple days, then we're going to go to 8,000 or 9,000 feet and spend a couple days, and then go climb a 14er, you've probably reduced your odds a little bit. The time at altitude and that's going up, the slowing it down decreases your odds. If you're really going high and if you really have time, there's a process that you see guys climbing Everest and such, they use where they go high, they drop low, they go a little higher, they drop low, and they kind of ladder their way up. If you have time to do that, fantastic. Most of us don't have that time. And so just know that going slower on the days leading up and increasing your altitude will help. Fluids help, as we've talked about in numerous videos. Other than this one, fluids are so important. The 2 or 3 days before you go up in the altitude, you're going to want to drink a lot of water, a gallon plus. It's amazing how important water is when we're talking about moving oxygen and such around your body. The more liquid you got running through yourself, the better. So you want to make sure you're very, very hydrated. On this other side, you want to avoid things that dehydrate you. Things like alcohol, tobacco, depressants, things like that tend to dehydrate us, thus increasing our odds of this. So avoid those things. In terms of prevention, medications, there are medications that can make it worse. There's also medications that can prevent it. You're certainly going to want to talk to your doctor about those. Just know that there's medicines on both sides of that equation that will make a difference. The fact of the matter is, like we said, you may not be able to prevent it at all, and that is just the fact of the matter. And so if we're going to take on this kind of task, that's something we just have to confront and decide if we can live with or not. So what does AMS look like? Well, very mild symptoms are maybe you have a mild headache, you feel a little fatigued, a little shortness of breath, you just can't quite catch your breath as quickly, but you do catch it. Maybe appetite drops a little bit. For me, my taste buds change, the food just doesn't taste good. You probably don't sleep as well because you're just not being able to get as much oxygen circulating around your body, so your body's like saying what's happening here, so it doesn't go into a quite as deep of sleep. But none of this probably interferes with your function. Okay, none of it causes you to not be able to function as you want. You're just noticing it. Okay, these are mild symptoms. If you go to moderate symptoms, the headache's going to increase. You're probably going to start to have upset stomach, whether it's nausea, vomiting, or your guts just feel like trash, right? You're like, ugh, I just don't feel good at all. A shortness of breath, even greater, and a difficulty in catching it. Like it takes you longer to then catch your breath after you've done something. Your coordination starts to diminish, so maybe you notice you drag your feet occasionally. Maybe you notice as you're trying to articulate fingers or something that they're not quite as articulate as you'd like them to be. They're not listening. I'm telling you to do this and they're not quite doing it like you'd like. Those are some moderate things. And these moderate symptoms will interfere with your function. You need to take moderate symptoms very seriously. My recommendation is if you get up on that mountain and you start to feel what I'm describing as moderately feeling bad, it's time to turn around. Because the fact of the matter is, going higher is only going to make it worse. And so you don't want it to get worse. So if you start to have moderate symptoms up there, it's time to turn around. Severe symptoms are where you're truly short on breath and you can't catch it. Your head is probably going to be killing you, and your guts are going to be screaming at you, not happy with what you're doing. You're going to start to have some real impairments in terms of your ability to walk, your ability to think clearly, the world's spinning, your body's just going to feel weird and kind of disoriented. You do not want severe symptoms. It's going to be hard to get off that mountain with severe symptoms. So that's why I say when you get to moderate, it's time to go down. You don't want to get severe. And some of us have a little more self-determination and egos involved. We think we can just power through this, and that's not true with altitude sickness. If you get altitude sickness bad enough, there's two conditions that can happen. One is called HAPE, H-A-P-E. The other is HACE, H-A-C-E. And these are fluid on the lungs and fluid on the brain. Altitude sickness is not like a head cold where you can just say, I'm going to power through it. It's just going to get worse. And so you obviously don't want those things to happen. Those are a bad thing to happen no matter where you're at, especially on the mountain. So please don't let your ego get in the way with this sort of thing. Recommendation I would make is if somebody gets altitude sickness and they decide to turn around and come back down, somebody has to go with them. You have to go in pairs, because if they're starting to struggle with these sort of things, like a moderate level of symptoms, then somebody has to be there in case they trip and fall, in case they start to really get confused, these sort of things. You need to have somebody with them. So you cannot just say, oh, so-and-so feels bad, head down the mountain. 2, 3 of you gotta go together so that you can help one another out down the mountain. So how do you treat it? If you get altitude sickness, how do you treat sickness? Well, number one is lower your elevation. Okay, so if you've gone up the mountain, let's say you're at 13,000 feet when it hits. Your trailhead's probably about 10 or 11, go down to the trailhead. Okay, get yourself down there. You'll be amazed at how just lowering your elevation helps how you feel. Now, if you go to the trailhead, you eat, you drink, you rest, those sort of things, and let's say an hour or so later, you still feel the same, then you need to get even lower. You need to go down to town, wherever it was you were staying. You need to get down to, let's say, 8,000 feet. And again, every step down you take, if you, within a few hours, don't feel better, if it's lingering, that's a greater indication you need to get lower and you need to get more medical help, okay? There are medications that can help, but again, that's going to a medical provider, a healthcare provider. You need to see a doctor for that. And so if you truly come down and you get back into town and you spend some time and you still feel gross, and maybe you go on down to Denver or a place like that where you're getting down a lot difference in elevation out of 5,000, and you still feel bad, that's a sign you need to go see a doctor. Now I would say this, this conversation isn't fun, right? None of us want to experience this. But I want to encourage you that if this happens, and as I said, it's happened to me more than one occasion, that doesn't mean you can't climb 14ers, okay? I've had literally the first time it hit me, day one, we hiked, it hit me like a ton of bricks. We came down to about 8,000 feet day 2. Day 3, we had plans to hike. I thought, okay, I'm gonna try it again. I spent 4 or 5 hours above 13,000 feet. We summited more than one 14er. I felt great all day long. It didn't bother me at all. I've had other trips where I've gone the whole time, hadn't bothered me. I've had other trips where I've just done one mountain, or even where I've been high for a couple days, like 11,000 feet, and then go to a 14er and I feel bad. It's just very unpredictable. Don't let one of these experiences totally ruin it for you. Now, if you have multiple ones, you may want to think about, okay, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I can hike at lower elevations. Maybe I do need to take some medication and things like that to help prevent it. But don't let one experience or the fear of this ruin it for you. But please be very smart and wise in how you're addressing this. Okay, I hope this has all been helpful for you. And as usual, I hope I get to see you at